Well, hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to the IoT World Manufacturing Day 2022. It's a great honor to be with you and to have such a talented wealth of knowledge that we're going to be talking about IoT. Over the next 60 minutes, we are going to explore the continuing shift toward the Industry 4.0, the IoT-related technology trends, and to that to include with the process for sustainable digital transformation journeys with a special focus on sustainability, operational excellence, and asset management. In addition, how the speed of adaptation drives competitive advantages and improves resiliency. And finally, a roadmap for achieving the pilot that can go beyond the proof of concept phase. Now, to get started, some of our speakers today, let me introduce them. Dr. Fanny Bashan, Hitachi Ventera, Rajesh Dimnani, Hitachi Ventera, Rajaj Kalidali, Jacobs, Vijay Kamineni, Logan Aluminum, and myself, I'm A.W. Schultz at Neiman Management Group. What we're going to do next is, to begin, we're going to do an introduction to scaling IoT, the imperatives, challenges that they face. And while Rajesh, as I pass it over to him, is going to be speaking, we're also going to be sending out a polling question to kind of give a feel for what is your knowledge in the IoT initiatives. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Rajesh. You're on mute, Rajesh.
Okay, sorry for that. Yeah, thanks for that, AW. And so I said, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, based on wherever you're joining this from. The session today is going to be on achieving industrial IoT outcomes at scale. And effectively, before we kind of jump into that, we thought we'll provide a bit of a context and a background and a sort of a preamble to jump into that. Now, as all of us know, we have been at the industrial IoT game for like a decade or slightly more than that. But what still remains sort of a mystery and sort of the holy grail for the whole organizations and community at large is the fact how to achieve outcomes at scale, right? So scaling still remains a formidable challenge, so as to speak, in the industrial IoT space. And barring a few large organizations which have been able to conquer that feat, it's kind of still mesmerizes and creates some issues. So that's what we're going to talk about in the session today. And while it's the holy grail, like I said, this is also the Achilles heel of most of the organizations in terms of trying to achieve scale from this. And what's really paramount is how do you cross the chasm and get beyond the purgatory of the POCs and really achieve outcomes at scale. So that's what we have covered in the session today. So EW, if you can flip to the next slide. Okay. So just to do a bit of a context setting, I think we are in the mainstream adoption phase of industrial IoT as it pertains to at least the POCs and pilots. Most of the organizations, large and small, are venturing into that in some form or shape. And there are definitely a lot of those early stage pilots and POCs done. But what remains, like I was saying earlier, challenge is how do you really scale this and make this an organizational competency where you are leveraging industrial IoT at scale to derive the potential business outcomes and the value and the benefits that we foresee from industrial IoT. I mean, a few leaders have clearly achieved that feat, but for the rest of the mere mortals, it still remains a bit of a challenge. So that's what we'll cover in the session today. Now, our viewpoint is that, of course, industrial IoT, from the perspective of many, has been viewed in terms of singular focus on technology, which is not necessarily going to enable the right outcomes. What we instead need to do is we need to think about IoT from a multifaceted perspective and account for the various capabilities, and be it organizational, be it process-oriented, be it technology, be it the overall change management aspects, and knit it all together into a holistic whole for IoT really to deliver on the outcomes that we expect from that. So in summary, IoT is not a standalone initiative. It can't be put in a silo again, but it has to be seen in the context of the overall business operations. Our panel is going to cover a lot of the details as we step into the panel discussion about it. AW, if you can flip to the next slide. So from a barriers or a roadblocks standpoint, I think we see quite a few, but what we have highlighted here is some of the most prominent ones. Clearly, it's not the end all be all. There's a host of other challenges one has to take into account, but these five are the most prominent ones that as a part of our research we have found prevalent across the board in organizations. First and foremost, it's about culture, and I'll quote the very famous quote from Peter Drucker, which was again re-quoted by Mark Andreessen, is around culture eating strategy for breakfast. So culture, like in all contexts, like in the strategy, overarching strategy of a business, is equally applicable when it comes to the realm of industrial IoT. So culture is something which is often, understated, but really comes at the forefront when we have to achieve outcomes at scale from IoT standpoint. So we have to be cognizant about that. The second one is around, clearly the lack of a dire need for talent in the sector. I mean, the whole industrial IoT revolution is going at a very fast clip, very fast pace, and talent needs to catch up in line with that. So that's a common demand, a common need across industry. And talent, again, has to be multifold. It's not just about technology. It's about having the business context. It's about understanding the domain, having the analytics know-how. There's so many facets to talent, and we need to have a well-rounded, holistic view of what our talent needs are if we have to really achieve the desired outcomes from IoT. The third one is around IoT is typically seen at times in organizations like a distinct siloed initiative and a one-off thing saying, hey, if I apply my do a POC here or a pilot there, we're going to achieve outcomes. That hasn't turned out to be the case. So those pilots die on the vine pretty quickly, and they are not able to achieve the scale or the outcomes that one desires. I think the fourth one is quite key from a standpoint because nothing works unless there's a leadership vision and a commitment towards that. And the leadership really needs to buy into the whole industrial IoT space and see that as a strategic lever that they can pull and work towards achieving these strategic outcomes from the application of industrial IoT. So that's another facet we're going to talk about in the discussion today. Last but not least, it's about any organization being encumbered with legacy, and from legacy not only from an infrastructure standpoint, but also from a processes standpoint, which become quite dated and not amenable to change. So one has to kind of overcome that hurdle or barrier as well. So like I said, I mean, it's a host of challenges one faces in terms of how do we bring scale to industrial IoT, and we're going to talk and try to cover all these in the ensuing panel discussion that we have. I'll just wrap up on the next slide, EW, if you can pull to that, and then we can get into the panel discussion. So this is just one perspective from our standpoint. I mean, this is our point of view in terms of how we see the scaling IoT initiative go. We call it the 5-box model, but essentially it's nothing new. It's kind of old wine, new bottle, and it's about people, process, and technology, and then you kind of interlace them with all the core building blocks and make it happen. So the first is about the business imperatives. So absolutely crystal clear vision in terms of what do we want to achieve, what are our end goals from IoT, how do we kind of drill that down into key defined KPIs, and corresponding to that, then identify what's the technology footprint which is going to enable that for us, and a technology footprint which is secure, which is scalable, which is performant, is something we need to look after. And then last but not least in that regard is the execution rigor and excellence that we need to focus on. And coupled with that, we have the core building blocks. So obviously we need an enabling culture, which kind of promotes the whole industrial IoT space. Ecosystem, partner ecosystem is quite key to the whole game because it's a complex game, and no one single party can do it alone. We need a host of players in the whole ecosystem to come together and make this happen. So ecosystem is very, very important in this context. I spoke about leadership. Leadership again comes to the fore in terms of ensuring that we achieve the right desired outcomes. And last but not the least is about a capability mindset and a constant learning, a continuous learning mindset about it, because things are continuously on the move, on the change from IoT standpoint. So we have to take cognizance of that. So when you do all this and put that together into a sort of a recipe, then what you will move towards is a sustainable result from an industrial IoT standpoint. And it's a multifaceted result. It's not a single faceted result. So clearly there's the financial benefits of it, which one would envisage from either a cost optimization or from a successful business model innovation, which leads to further benefits for the organization in terms of scaling the overall revenues and the growth aspects. but also from multiple aspects like value from the eyes of the customer, value from an employee perspective, and also from a societal and from an environmental standpoint. So that's in a nutshell what the whole scaling IoT concept is all about. We have a good panel of very reputed people from the industry who experience this day in, day out, and we would like to get into the panel discussion now to walk you through that. So with that, back to you, AW.
Okay, thank you, Rajesh. If we can, are we able to pull up the polling? The way we're going to progress through this is we've got a series of topics we're going to be touching on, along with questions that I've got for the group, and then at the end we'll do a little Q&A. And throughout the discussion, if you have some questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll try to address them at the end, or we will follow up with you at a later point. All right. Are we able to pull the poll up?
Yeah, we wrap up the poll in just 5 seconds.
Okay. Then we'll also have a couple more polls at the end of the year. Okay, so here's kind of the results of the audience we're with today. So some people out there looking for more into the vision and understand what the culture and some of the challenges that can be out there. Okay, great. All right, that's good. That kind of gives us a good understanding of what we're talking about today, and please feel free to share some of your questions in the chats as we move forward on this. So to begin, our first topic is the industrial Internet of Things 4.0 adoption trends in the industry. Some things I'm always curious and want to learn about. So my first question, it goes out to VJ. Can you now say that the industry is progressing beyond the pilot precarity and seeing scaled IoT deployments? Is the trends specific to some industries, verticals, or is it across the board throughout all the industries?
AW, I'm glad we're talking about pilot purgatory. That means at least we identify that stage exists and we can see beyond it. I'm glad Logan and many manufacturing industries are in the journey somewhere between the pilots, emerging technologies, and scaled environments. I see many of these are still in early stages of IIoT deployment. There are few that reach the scale, and many are in the journey as we go through this. We see off late many industrial automation products now come IoT enabled, which makes it easier, and also in some cases makes it complicated because they are all different and they all work on different platforms. Trend, I would not say it's uniform across the industry. The variation is more than just in particular verticals. It's rather multifaceted, like Rajesh said. It depends on factors like types of manufacturing. Equipment manufacturers are a little more ahead than commodity manufacturers. It depends on the level of IT-OT convergence and the data governance systems they have. Depends on the geographic distribution of the organization and assets. If you have a few consolidated locations, they're further behind than organizations that have assets spread over the geographic locations. Maturity of culture certainly is a factor in the variation. And example, how risk averse or risk mitigating a company is. All these factors come into play. It's not just a industry vertical. But like I said, we are on that journey, and I'm very excited to see the next few years will be very, very exciting for industrial IoT deployments at scale.
I agree. Yeah, and it's everywhere. Good, thank you. My next question, and then this is for Raja. And if your industry is not seeing this, I'm sure it's going to be coming down the pipeline. But it's about sustainability. And what about sustainability? How can IoT help address sustainability objectives of the manufacturer?
Well, AW, that can be an expansive question. Let me open up the lens a little bit and go from sustainability to a larger corporate trend that we're seeing. And that is the strategy of having a sustainable business that is driven by and incorporates environmental, social, and governance factors into decision-making, more commonly referred to as ESG. A Gartner survey of CEOs listed ESG as a top 10 business priority, as they're seeing it as a good way to attract customers, investors, and employees. In fact, we at Jacobs have recognized this trend and established our own Office of Global Climate Response and ESG to create sustainable and resilient solutions that align to the values and the goals of our clients as they look at the challenges such as energy transition, decarbonization, adaptation and mitigation, and natural resource stewardship. The use of IIoT can really help shine the light on manufacturing processes to help enable those corporate strategies. I'll be honest and say a good deal of sustainability tracking right now is done with gosh, pen and paper and spreadsheets. Those processes are so thirsty for the capabilities that IIoT can bring. So let me walk through an example. I happen to live in California, and we're facing one of the worst droughts in decades. Southern California will put in place the most severe water restrictions in history starting next month. And the water level in Lake Mead, which is in southern Nevada, happens to be the largest man-made reservoir in the US, is so low that is now actually below, the water line is actually below the original water intake valve that was put in place back in 1971. So there are many industrial processes that are heavy consumers of water, from paper production to chemical and dye manufacturing. In fact, it takes over 120 gallons of water for every dollar of product produced within the coating manufacturing sector. So heavy water consumption. The monitoring capabilities that IoT affords to better understand that underlying process and waste points, coupled with the ability to drive real-time refinement and control of the processes, makes sustainability and ESG goals a perfect use case for IoT. It's further bolstered by the fact that many of the opportunities will be in retrofit or brownfield settings. And this is where IoT really can shine because the installation and startup has a lower operational impact or footprint. If you're doubtful on our ability to drive sustainable changes, the reduction of water use in the semiconductor manufacturing sector is a good example, almost a North Star of what can be done. Intel uses around 12 billion gallons of water per year in chip production, and that was back in 2018. They have reduced water consumption by 40%, bringing their consumption down to 2010 levels. And they're actually on target to be net zero by 2025. The other thing to note is the ripple effect that we often see on the sustainability side. For instance, the #1 consumer of electricity in California is actually moving water around. If you can reduce consumption, just like the examples we were talking about, you reduce electricity use, which in turn reduces greenhouse gases that are helping to drive those drought conditions. That ripple effect of sustainability goodness, creating benefits downstream, is very common. Lastly, I want to circle back to the employee element of ESG. The pandemic has created some really challenging labor dynamics in the market, and also has had a massive impact on our supply chain and operational resilience. Taking a closer look at the operational resilience piece, in our markets research, we see about 95% of our clients either having undertaken or will undertake a digital transformation effort in the next few years. And we define that digital transformation as the process of exploiting digital technologies and supporting capabilities to create a robust new business model or operating model. It really isn't about the technology, it's about driving those outcomes that IIoT can do. With regards to the outcomes, 90% are expecting to achieve operational improvements, and 97% are wanting to predict operational upsets before they happen, both of these are very much focused on operational resilience. So IIoT can really be a key part in that sustainability quest that a lot of corporations are seeking. In fact, at a larger level, we're seeing a trend for corporations to align to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which at a higher level outlines 17 areas of focus to achieve sustainable development at that global level.
Yeah, that's interesting. It kind of fills in with the question that I asked BJ. The pen and paper is probably still the king right now. But like he said, in a few years, along with the process improvement sustainability, it's going to evolve. And it's amazing to think about, just because you're moving water, you're saving the amount of energy that goes into that. Because yeah, there's a lot of pumps out there that's got to move a lot of that product, and sustainability is something that is going to be certainly a bigger conversation as years come, especially when companies want to go to net zero.
Yep. All
right. Okay. Topic number 2, best practices. How to overcome some of the key challenges in scaling your IIoT. Now, I'm going to go back to VJ again. So what are the key challenges you're going with when you're dealing with pilots or proof of concepts into large deployments? And do you have some examples that you can give of these challenges and how you address them?
Yeah, AW. Logan Aluminum, we are a beverage can sheet manufacturer with 60 acres under the roof, and we produce about 2.5 billion pounds of aluminum beverage can sheet, about little over 47% of the North American beverage can sheet. So we have a large operation with about 85,000 data points that we collect. It's a 40-year-old plant. So I understand the challenges of the brownfield. When you look at, and over the last few years, as our journey we started our journey, like most other organizations, we went with the multiple pilots and POCs in various areas as the technology started emerging. Some of those challenges, I think it will be a large list of challenges, but a few of the challenges I can mention are, firstly, lack of coordination of those pilot projects. As technology started coming into the manufacturing, we started having pockets of IoT deployments, and getting all of them to fit together, that was a challenge. The need and increasing complexity of the IoT and IoT devices in automation world. That brings a challenge. As we learn through that, it's a challenge from a safety perspective, data governance perspective, and cybersecurity perspective. You don't want devices connecting without having proper governance when people are working with 50,000-pound coils, aluminum sheets going. Another challenge is the lack of common understanding and vision on what IIoT and what edge versus cloud and these terminologies mean, how these deployments are being rolled out. There's a variety of definitions, variety of implementations in those areas. And more than the leadership vision, this is at the grassroots level, the understanding and the vision where this IoT platform should benefit our operators, our team leaders and managers on the shop floor, bringing that common understanding and vision on where manufacturing can benefit from IoT and IoT deployments. Usually, most organizations do a few pilot projects without any common architecture. We're trying to figure out the architecture or a central platform. By the time we realize we need a central platform, we get back into the same issue most manufacturers face. Now we have 10 different systems, and the brownfield challenges. We're creating more brownfield challenges by not coordinating those POCs together. At the time of scaling, this will become a mixed bag of technologies, and it would impact your investment plans and the uniformity of usage across the user base. Another example of the challenge is the POCs most of the times are not reflective of the large scale deployments. How we choose what we are doing the pilot on our POC, typically we pick a safe, easy, or we pick the most difficult challenge that we were not able. Neither one of them are reflective of the common large scale deployment. So they're on the fringes. So planning how we scale, setting up our roadmap and what follows after what is important. These two are relatively easy to overcome with a vision and a roadmap and a strategy. The main challenge we face is the technology. For larger deployments, the technology is still emerging. The speed of change in IoT technology, there's a lot of innovation still happening, a lot of new features and new solutions coming into the market. So we are not there yet, wherever there is. I don't think, looking at the last few years, there is a there that we are looking at. It's a continuous journey. And from a manufacturing culture, traditional manufacturing culture, that's hard. We look for proven, time-tested technologies in our industry. When we look at which other sheet metal industries have implemented this for 3-4 years and stable technology, we're not there yet. And with the speed of change, I don't know if we'll be there anytime soon. So that's where the maturity of culture, of a continuous improvement mindset, and maturity of your continuous improvement mindset helps mitigating those challenges. There's a long list of challenges, and usually it's individual mitigations based on the culture and based on the problem they're facing, but it's hopeful that we're traveling in the right direction.
Okay. Dr. Bashan, would you have any other additional perspectives on this, or what to avoid?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that Vijay talked about. Pretty much what all it boils down to is looking at, as we move from pilots to scaling, it's important to look at it as a program, long-term program, as opposed to a project. It's actually, we are managing a portfolio of projects, in my view. And right up front, designing all aspects of that program becomes very important. It's important not to, we cannot overlook even some of the things such as the current IT/OT processes. How are projects onboarded, for example? These are IoT projects are new kind of projects. It involves hardware, it involves data, it involves software, a lot of things that Vijay talked about, right? So which means right up front, it's important to consider what are the current IT processes, how can they, how can they be adapted to accommodate the new things that need to be taken care of when it comes to OT aspects are taken into account, brought in. The change management awareness, we cannot underestimate the thinking that needs to go into that. It's very important. Ultimately, IoT benefits need to impact the frontline workers. So they will have to understand what the change implies, how it benefits them from an overall process point of view. So a lot of dimensions that Vijay talked about, taking all of that into consideration, think of it as a program more than a project. That's how I would put it. Again, we covered a lot of those angles. What Vijay talked about, we see not just one type of manufacturing in every industry wherever we work. We have seen similar characteristics, challenges with brownfield, challenges with greenfield, new technologies coming in. So it's also important to look at to drive standardization and scale and standardization. It's important to have guardrails, like a reference architecture or something. But at the same time, given the nature of evolving technologies and new opportunities get discovered as you start deploying use cases in a particular location or a particular line. So there has to be enough flexibility to allow for that innovation, for lack of a better word. And I would say one more point is, again, data. Data is important. So data management, large scale data management where unstructured and other OT data comes into play. So a lot of these things need to come together, and which means that, again, I would emphasize looking at it as a longer term program kind of a view for sure, which has a significant business value.
Okay, thank you. So Dr. Bishan and Rajesh, you're both at Hitachi Venturi. Bishan, what suggestions do you have for someone who is early or in a pilot stages of an IoT program?
Yeah, I think a lot of the ground has been covered, but it boils down to the basic fundamentals, right? When you are in a pilot, it should not be the case that you're missing the forest for the trees. So you may start small, but your thinking has to be holistic. And like Dr. Funny rightly said, it is about thinking of it like a program, right? So you have to conceptualize things from that standpoint, thinking that this is going to be one of the many initiatives. So a few factors gain prominence in that context. One is about the point that Vijay alluded to in terms of having the core infrastructure in place, right? So you can't build unless you have a strong, solid foundation. You can't build off that. So you need to have the core infrastructure in place. You need to have the baseline of best practices in place, of which you can feed and then evolve. Because that creates a sort of a repeatable construct for you. It allows a lot of reusability in that, standardization, and accords you speed as you venture on your IoT journey. So I think the existence or creation of a core underlying infrastructure and processes and standards is pretty paramount from that standpoint. The second is, I would say, don't venture on a journey in case of just picking on an isolated pilot. I mean, there's a lot of hype around certain poster child use cases like predictive maintenance, and it's very easy to kind of go down the wrong path, get disillusioned in a while, because if you take it on a standalone basis in a small setting, it may not deliver the impact or the value that you're desiring. It has to tie in with the entire process and the workflow in the organization for it to have the right business impact. So you need to take a much more holistic view and then carve out that base platform and do it. The second part I would say is around taking a sort of assessment perspective to it. When you're venturing on a journey, look at it from the standpoint of how can I assess what potentially is going to deliver the biggest bang for the buck for me. So how do I assess my IoT, industrial IoT requirements, and what I'm trying to derive out of that? And then kind of build a prioritized stack rank list. And the way we recommend sort of an evaluation for that is what we call as a 3I framework, which is nothing but evaluate it from the perspective of the impact it is going to create, whether it's financial or otherwise. It could be a social or a ESG impact like Raja spoke about. So consider the impact that is likely from that particular initiative. Thinking around the investment dimension in terms of how much investment would be required, because you need to prioritize on the basis of that. And there's only so many limited dollars to go around. So you prioritize on that basis. And the third is around the implementation feasibility. Some ideas may sound very good on paper, but may not work out owing to maybe the technological feasibility or even the cultural aspects of an organization. So that can also put a roadblock or a barrier. So what we say is build a holistic plan. Start small, but think big and build a holistic plan, and then gradually step onto that journey.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's kind of probably one of my takeaways, certainly with best practices, and have a plan, incorporate the individuals out there that are on that plan, and make sure there's a communication method on that, because throwing out there something that may not be of value to them at some point, while it might be value to others, might not be the holistic best approach to anything. So that's good. Topic 3 we have is, we're talking about analytics. So IoT data analytics in the key dimensions in an IoT application. Now, I'm going to go back to Rajesh on this. How important is AI analytics in IoT success?
Sure. So I think, I wouldn't kind of segregate both of these areas. So industrial IoT is, in my mind, inseparable from, and it's very closely intertwined with analytics and AI. So you can't really separate the two. Now, having said that, kind of IoT provides the fundamental foundation of the building blocks for what you can feed your AI and analytics of. So IoT is all about gathering data, collecting data, curating data, consolidating it, orchestrating from various part pieces, from various source systems, and bringing it all together where you can have a data set available, which you can work off and then create the right business insights and the value of that data. So that's the way I look at it. And it is true from all perspectives, whether if you're looking at it from a mission critical real-time application standpoint. I think the true value of analytics is if you have the right data in place, and it could apply across a spectrum of use cases, right? So it could be put into, process control. It could apply to your computer vision-based quality control. It could apply to maintenance applications, and the list goes on basically. So it could apply to real-time applications, and it also applies in terms of where you are, collecting a lot of historic data and building your algorithms and models of that. And then deploying them, building in the cloud and deploying on the edge. So I think there's a close intertwinement between the two in my mind, and both work simultaneously hand in hand to deliver the right value from industrial IoT applications.
Okay. Raja, same topic, but are there any special considerations when it comes to the IoT data and analytics as compared to just IoT data?
Yeah, sure. One of the largest differences between analytics and data on the IT side versus the IoT side is that streaming aspect or real-time nature that certainly demands a level of criticality on when and where that data is analyzed. Borrowing and morphing a phrase from Vivek Ranadive, the founder of TIBCO, he referred to the concept of the power of now, which was about companies responding to changes through real-time technology. We've kind of morphed this into what we call the value of now. There's certain data whose value decays exponentially over time. Me finding out that a piece of equipment is on the verge of failing and having enough time to go in there and do the proper maintenance to recover from that, as opposed to me finding out that a piece of equipment has failed. There's incredible value in that. And that exponential decaying over time of that value is pretty critical in terms of us being able to run the proper analytics on it. So this drives that need to have real-time systems to ingest the data and analytics to process that data and provide real-time insights. A common question that I ask CIOs when I meet with them is, gosh, of all the data that you generate, how much do you actually use? How much is used for value creation? The typical response is a meager 10%. The other 90% is never analyzed. And oftentimes a good chunk of that data is coming from the manufacturing floor. Another data point from our market research is that over 80% of respondents felt that they were not challenged at all in terms of storing and managing streaming real-time data. But nearly 90% felt that they could not process that data in a sufficient real-time cycle to drive operational insights. So this is really leading a push to move analytics closer to the collection point. For instance, edge computing that Vijay was talking about earlier, and kind of avoiding that cascading store and forward processing where the context of the data becomes a little muddied. One last tidbit from our surveying is that we found that 100% of respondents, there aren't too many questions that I can put on a survey where I get 100% response, but 100% of respondents felt that data quality was a major impediment to implementing streaming analytics. One way around this that you really don't see on the IT side is the use of synthetic data. So I'm going to get into a few definitions here. First, I'm going to talk about a digital twin, which is a connected digital replica of a physical system that unites real-time data, simulation, analytics, and visualization to support both human and autonomous decision-making, kind of driving into that analytics piece again. We see a lot of use of the term digital twin, and that can be from, gosh, a simple building information model, which is a representation of a facility, to a simulation model. So recognize that both of these are models. Ultimately, you have the fusion of real-time data, which is most likely coming from an IoT system. And that's what turns those models into a digital twin. Second definition that I kind of mentioned was this synthetic data. And synthetic data is basically data that's artificially manufactured or captured from a replica rather than generated directly by the system under study. Synthetic data is used as a stand-in to help drive analytics and machine learning. You know, some projections show that synthetic data will actually outpace captured data by 2030 in machine learning models. There are also some interesting analogies in cognitive science in terms of the ways that humans fill in the blanks in missing data or poor data situations. Again, going back to that 100% response in terms of what's holding folks back of data, that being data quality. So taking a look at that data quality challenge and being able to hit the value of now button, we're seeing expanded use of digital twins that are enriched with IoT data. That IoT data really helps to establish kind of the current operating conditions. Where am I now? That allows a digital twin to generate context appropriate synthetic data that can act as a surrogate replacement in poor data settings. Again, going back to that #1 challenge of data quality.
So when you talk about synthetic data, how do you know that you're trusting the initial data, that the synthetic data isn't going to give a
that is a good question. Your underlying models that you end up developing for your digital twin that end up getting fused with that real-time data certainly need to be based on validated data. The thing that we often see is if you run just a model by itself, it'll tend to drift. The fact that we can re-anchor that model against what is happening now with the IoT data stream coming in, that allows almost a recalibration in near real time of that synthetic data generation. So maybe you didn't get it right the first time, but it is constantly kind of recalibrating as we get more data in, and we were able to measure that operational state.
Is that similar to a Monte Carlo simulation?
Well, Monte Carlo comes into play a little more when you're thinking about going forward in terms of, hey, what can be happening in the future. This piece that we're talking about here is a little more focused on the kind of real-time operational aspects and the analytics that you want to apply. We can then take that digital twin, feed it with kind of different Monte Carlo. We can feed it with different states or starting points that we've seen in the past that can then help drive that Monte Carlo simulation.
Okay, good.
This ability to use that surrogate data to replace the data in poor data settings and provide value for process variables that sometimes can't even be measured with online instrumentation is definitely something that we're seeing. That processing workflow further bolsters analytics. In fact, I'm currently involved in an effort in Singapore that is utilizing that synthetic data feed to be able to provide consistent analytics and in a very non-austere data setting. It's something that we've labeled as informed AI, as the digital twin informs the analytics and learning processes. Those elements really don't come into play on the IT side, but are critical for IoT analytics to handle these kind of process perturbations. I just went through differences between the IT side and the OT side, but you really should not treat analytics on both sides as silos. The trend for IT-OT fusion is gosh, pretty darn strong right now, and a lot of value can be achieved. Reflecting back to that second poll question, I believe the lack of strategy was the top response in terms of holdbacks or challenges on scaling. Ultimately, it boils down to how do you want to run the business? How do you want to grow the business? Which will then guide you in terms of how you want to transform that business. Running the business and growing the business will require ebb and flow between business systems, data, and processes that are typically managed on the IT side with the operational or manufacturing systems, data, and processes that are typically run on the OT side. The ability to manage and migrate analytic workloads is pushing to more of a hybrid cloud model that allows for edge computing. So being able to shift those workflows, being able to make sure that the right data is getting from the operational side to the IT side, really important. So we started off by talking about the differences, but gosh, there's a happy middle place as well that we can't ignore.
Thank you. I think what we're going to do move forward is to go to a polling question, and then I'm going to pull up a chat question for the group to kind of just maybe a rapid fire. And as you're taking the poll question, we'll work to see if we can answer some of these questions out there. So you should be now receiving a poll question. Call number 3 is, what is your organization plan to achieve or is using? And then I'm going to open up the chat. And I'm kind of going just in order. Are these platforms physical, virtualized, or containerized? And I think this is Rajesh. This might be a question for you regarding to the slides that you had shared.
Sorry, I was in mute. Yeah. So basically, the trend in terms of the way we have conceptualized and building our platforms, there's a keen trend towards the containerization of applications and platforms, right? So you have to build these applications in a way that are portable, so applying the microservices concept and also doing containerization to a large extent. I think the whole paradigm is shifting towards that mode. And also another trend in play, which we are also leveraging actively and heavily, is around the whole low code, no code when it comes to the IoT platforms development side of things. So it's about making applications seamlessly weave into your existing environment and being so user-friendly that you're able to kind of navigate through those applications and drive the right value from the industrial IoT application. A lot of innovation happening in the overall space. I think as a part of our Lumada IoT platform, a lot of these concepts are already baked into the platform and being built out. And it's all built towards repeatability, scale, performance, and security. All those are core constructs, core elements that are baked into the platform.
Okay. And then this is probably another question for the Hitachi Ventura Group is, how does Hitachi as a consultant arbitrate all these issues for its clients? And
yeah, so sorry, complete.
That was it.
So yeah, it's a very relevant question, and there's no easy answers to that. So it's always going to be a tightrope walk, because you're walking between you've got the technology dimension, you've got the change dimension, you've got the legacy estate dimension, so to speak. So there are multiple moving parts to it. So there are no easy answers, but it's about like what most of us said at the beginning. It's about thinking of it like a long overarching program that you think about, create, construct the roadmap, and then meticulously embark on that journey and go step by step to get all the roadblocks on route out of the way and start delivering on that value. So no easy answers there. I think we have structured methodologies in place and best practices and tooling and technologies which enable the whole thing to kind of weave together. But ultimately, people is the most important dimension, and people from all perspectives, people who are actually going to use the technology and make the best of that technology. But then there's also the leadership dimension from a people standpoint, in terms of having the right leadership buy-in and the leadership vision and drive to push this forth, so that we actually imbibe adopt these technologies and get the right value from them. So I think it's a multi-layered question. I say there are no easy answers to that in right earnest, but yeah, it's all about being able to have the right operational rigor and put in place, following the whole methodology meticulously, and having the right set of stakeholders on board, including the partner ecosystem as well, which I alluded to earlier. So you can't do it alone, and that's very clear. No one single party has the entire capabilities and the wherewithal to play it alone and do it alone. So a combination of multiple factors which come into play for addressing this. That's my take.
Yeah,
Okay.
just to add, right? So as Hitachi, depending on where the customer's state of the journey is, we do get involved and provide help in that process. As we are currently working with both Vijay and Raja's organization, they are in their own journey at different stages. If somebody is in an early stage, we could help with the strategy. Somebody requires some kind of a COE construct to be put in place to hold all of this together while it is taking off, or somebody may already have an established program, a technology stack, and then the question is, can we help with a use case? So to answer that question, it depends on what stage in the journey a particular environment is in.
My next question is, and I open it to the group because I'm sure everyone has probably, if not experienced this, is still working through this, is how do you get the buy-in from quality and production planning departments that are stuck in that we've ran it this way for 20 years, done mindset, and what do you do once you start scaling?
I'll take a shot at that, AW.
I was hoping you would.
This is near and dear to me. We're a single location manufacturing plant, and we're team focused Toyota manufacturing system. So the quality, the production quality department, they're the same for us. What we learned early on is we tend to come at IIoT as a data collection for analysts, data scientists, management sitting somewhere else. And they're right, they have been running, in our case, for 40 years, they've been running without IIoT and made us a world-class beverage can sheet manufacturer. But what we learned is any IIoT, the edge analytics, every use case should have a component that makes my life as a frontline employee easier. Something that will buy me some time back with my family and kids, or let me take another extra. If we can't answer what's in it for the frontline, if IoT is not helping the OT operation technology employees, will have this problem. So coming from their perspective and saying, what has been bothering you for 20 years? What is that one thing you wish you would never want to do again? And include that into your use case. It worked better. You'll still get the data for your analysts and the management, but it should be from their perspective.
Okay, good. Just a reminder, if anybody's got some questions out there, please throw them in the chat. A lot of great questions coming in. I don't think we're having time to answer them all, but they are very well thought out, and they're actually great questions. What I want to ask next is there a digital transformation framework where organizations can determine their maturity scores? So maybe just when are they ready to start, or what's a good offering for them versus a more advanced complex operation?
There is a maturity framework available. There are some available. Hitachi Vantara also has one. So it definitely is going to, or looks at all multiple dimensions of a digital transformation. We talked about planning, for example, production planning. If I were to look at it as a process or a function, that under that category, it looks into that. There is a whole host of level of data availability, level of automation that exists. There are a lot of different dimensions that go into it. And the idea is to use the framework, come out with a quantified view of where the current maturity levels are for a given operation or a facility. More often than not, each line would have a different level of maturity. For sure, each plant would differ from the other plant when it comes to maturity levels. So there are frameworks available, and we do have one as well.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, us on the Jacob side, apply that digital maturity model is the first step when we usually have the conversations with our clients. Ours is kind of based off of the capability maturity model. So if you're looking at a basis, perhaps looking at some of the models there that are created from CMMI.
I lost where the question was, but I liked how it was phrased. It was from anonymous. If you're in a facility and essentially you're trying to convince, it said directors, but I imagine the decision makers on an IoT technology, how would you go about that? You're trying to convince them that we need to go farther than IoT.
I think it's ultimately about the value equation, right? And value can manifest itself in multiple ways. So one is the pure economic value, which is obviously key. One has to consider that. I think you have to, there are multiple other aspects to it. It could also be a value from other standpoints, like safety could be a key value, part of the driver. It could be around environmental aspects. It could be around sustainability. So it could be about stakeholders, other stakeholders in the ecosystem. So I think what we tend to do is take a siloed view about it from an economic value standpoint. But even if we stay with the economic value, I think it's about how you measure it, and it comes back to the same framework I spoke about, the 3I, right? So how do you quantify the whole framework so that you're able to measure the real business value that you're going to derive from a particular use case? And it all really boils down to that. So clearly there are frameworks in place for doing that. You have to apply a set of assumptions going into it. You need a good degree of domain know-how to understand what your drivers are. You need data points from the past in terms of baselining. And then there's an evaluation process in terms of how you measure against the baseline once you've implemented the use cases over a period of time to really get an understanding of what's the real value you derive, just from a financial standpoint. And then there's similarly other value aspects that one could measure.
Are we able to pull the polling question back up? Because we're running a little low on time, but I did want to finish up with just talking about what are each of your industries or companies' strategy. I talk about myself at the VMIT Management Group. We're bringing innovation and improve the way work lives and evolves. And I'd be curious to see how Hitachi Ventura's strategy works within IoT. Rajesh, are you able to answer that or understand what your strategies are?
So I think, like we say at Hitachi, we were born industrial and we breathe digital, right? So that's the fundamental building block. And Hitachi has all been about IT and OT. And when you blend that together, when you kind of bring them together, it's all about industrial IoT. We are at heart an industrial company. We are all about large, complex assets. And we do engineer, design, build, run, maintain those assets. So industrial IoT is really at the heart of our strategy across our various business units. And what we've done last year is we've kind of put them into a few clusters. And those clusters, in my opinion, are very thematic. So we've got a cluster around green energy and mobility, which plays into the whole sustainability theme around decarbonization, net zero, all the impact it can create from that standpoint. Then we've got our digital systems and services, which is about really creating the right underlying infrastructure, platforms, products, and services, which enable digital transformation to happen for our customers. The third one is what we call as the connective industries, and that includes the industrial portfolio. And industrial, again, industrial IoT is really at the heart of it, because like I said, we're on assets, so it's very fundamental to that. And the second component is around urban and the water utilities and things like that. So So all our businesses from that standpoint are really, we are applying industrial IoT at scale in those units internally at Hitachi first. So in a way of saying, we are eating our own dog food and trying to create the right value for those business units, enabling the right level of differentiation in those business units, and on the journey to create exponential value from that, both for ourselves and as well as for us end customers. So that's really the roadmap and the path for us. A few key themes en route to this are going to be around sustainability. So we were a principal partner for COP26. So we are very committed to the whole net zero vision and embarking on it in a multifaceted way. So it includes about autonomy, electrification, but building the entire EV charging infrastructure as part of one of our units. So multiple initiatives underway from that standpoint. And we are also about safety. We are about security. We are about resilience, building resilience in the face of all the upsets we are seeing in the world, pandemics or wars. So Hitachi is all about creating societal value, leveraging our underlying core IoT competencies, which are manifest in our Lumada platform, which is like overarching framework comprising of best practices for IoT, but also includes the IoT platform as well. So that in a nutshell is what our strategy is really.
Good. We only got a couple seconds left. Jacobs and Logan, real quickly, strategies. Jacobs, go ahead. Project.
Well, I think there's a fair amount of discussion about, hey, how do we get the buy-in? How do we get the endorsement? I do want to circle back to understanding again how the business wants to run and how the business wants to grow. You need to align your business cases, your value statements against what the business really wants to achieve. It's not about throwing technology out there just for technology's sake. You need to put yourself almost in the shoes of the CEO and the CFO and understand what metrics they're trying to hit and how can you help them on that journey. That's really where you're going to get the buy-in and the validation of everything you're doing on the manufacturing and IoT side to get that investment.
I agree. Logan, last thoughts?
Yeah, we learned along our last 4 years of journey that our strategy is, instead of going one after a linear approach, it's a metric approach of the roadmap, spreading small use cases across all entire organization, bringing back small value to multiple locations and creating that portfolio, because technologies are emerging. We don't know what our need would be next year, what the availability of technology will be next year, but we're all focusing on the same KPIs. Keep the KPIs, like Raja said, on the forefront and spread the implementations across so multiple people can see the value in multiple dimensions. That strategy seemed to work rather than a linear build one and apply it in another place. It might not fit that way.
Okay, well, great. We're out of time, guys. I want to thank Hitachi for sponsoring this event. A lot of great discussions, and if you put your comments in the chat, we'll get back to you on this. But thanks for attending the IoT of manufacturing.